Oh man, this is why people buy MacBooks. This is gonna be interesting. We have Apple's brand new M2 MacBook Pro and Dell's redesigned XPS 13 Plus. Not only are we gonna compare the design differences, the displays, the speakers and webcams, but also thermals and fan noise, CPU and graphics performance, and real world productivity tasks to see which one of these is the better laptop. Starting off with design, this thing is a beauty. This is what a 2022 laptop should look like. Look at those slim bezels, and this screen is actually slightly larger than the MacBooks, both 16 by 10. Look at that keyboard. We have this bottom here that is completely flush. It does have a trackpad. I mean, this looks like a nice modern machine compared to Apple's design, which is straight out of 2016. The XPS is smaller. I mean, look at that. It is hilariously small. It is also lighter, and it's actually ever so slightly thinner, even though it looks thicker because it has a flat top instead of curved at the edges. On the left side, the MacBook has 2 Thunderbolt 3 ports, whereas the Dell has 1 Thunderbolt 4. And on the right side, the Dell gives you 1 more Thunderbolt 4, whereas the MacBook has a headphone jack. So yes, this Dell does not come with a headphone jack. That is crazy. Now they do toss an adapter in the box, but I do think that is just crazy not to have one. You guys let me know your thoughts down below. The MacBook has Touch ID to log in, whereas the XPS has Windows Hello. So it sees my face and just logs me in automatically. Now, if you don't want to use that, which I don't know why you wouldn't, there is actually a fingerprint scanner built into the power button as well. As far as the keyboards, the MacBook has a really good one. This Dell, as you can see, spans the whole width of the laptop without any gaps between. Now, it surprisingly feels pretty dang good, very close to the Mac. It has some good travel and it has some good feedback, so I'm quite surprised by it. Now, right below, of course, with the MacBook, we have this trackpad. It is amazing. It has that Force touch, and the Dell, you don't see it at all. It is hidden, but it is not a diving board keyboard. It also uses magnets. It feels fantastic. It does take a little bit of getting used to the right spot, but I really like it. Now, above that, people have been saying that Dell copied Apple with their touch bar. Now, these are just capacitive keys. I mean, it looks really clean. It does work. There's no really feedback or anything like that. So I don't think it's as nice as the touch bar, even though we don't love the touch bar. This thing has an actual screen. It has a chip that does all the processing. It's customizable. So technically this touch bar is better. Before we check out this OLED display, let's go ahead and compare the speakers and the webcams. Dell made a big deal about this having a new quad speaker system. So let's see how good it sounds. All right, wow, the XPS definitely gets louder. It has more clarity. The highs really stand out. I would say it's the better speaker system. Now, there's only one thing that is bugging me, and that's the fact that the volume changes based on how much bass is in your song. And I checked the settings, the weird upscaling stuff and effects, it's turned off. So take a listen right here. It's not too loud, right? And then take a listen right here. The volume is getting louder where there's no bass, a lot louder. And then let's go back. So, I don't know, it's just really, really weird. I would rather have it be set to one volume instead of trying to adjust it. I remember the Sonos speakers used to do that, it was terrible. Now, as far as webcams and microphones, this is Apple's 720p webcam in their MacBook Pro with their beamforming microphones. And this is Dell's 720p webcam and their microphones. Go ahead and let me know down below which one looks better and which one sounds better. And now let's compare the displays, and we have a ton of differences. First off, they are both 16 by 10. The Dell is 13.4 inches compared to 13.3, so slightly larger. And as far as the resolution, it has almost double the pixels. We have the OLED model here. It is also a touchscreen, and it does look quite nice. Now, can I tell the difference between Apple's Retina and then this higher resolution one? No, not really. At least from this distance, I can't see the pixels. Now, we also have the issue of Windows scaling. It's not as good as macOS, and because of that, some of the text can look fuzzier at times. Now, as far as brightness, let me go ahead and max out both of these. Both of these are rated at 500 nits, but the Dell does look brighter. Not only that, but because it's OLED, it has better off-axis viewing angles, whereas the MacBook, it loses brightness and contrast. And as far as reflectivity, believe it or not, but the Dell actually has better coatings now than the MacBook has. And now let's go ahead and play some video and see which one looks better. First thing I notice is just how much more saturated the OLED screen and the XPS is. I think it's a little bit too much, but of course that can be easily tweaked in the settings. The highlights in this HDR video definitely pop more on the Dell, even though both have the same brightness ratings, and the deep contrast is also better because it is an OLED panel. I'm playing both of these back in 4K, and I do see a little bit more detail on the Dell, which has a lot more pixels to make use of. Now, when we shut the lights off, we really see a huge difference. Look at that contrast. The LCD panel on the MacBook looks great compared to pure black with the OLED on the Dell. And playing back this HDR footage, it looks way better than on the MacBook. I mean, the difference is dramatic. Now, I can't believe I'm saying this, but Dell finally defeated Apple with their displays. For watching videos, it's great. The speakers now are a lot louder and sound better as well. And if you're a content creator, it can actually be very color accurate as well, but you do have to know that with OLED, you wanna calibrate the screen at one brightness and leave it there. There's really only two downsides. One, the price, it's more expensive, and two, it really hits the battery life, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. And now let's get into performance, starting out with the SSDs. Now, both of these do have 512 gigabytes of storage, and as you can see, the Dell absolutely smoked the MacBook. The Dell's write speed is about 45% faster, and as far as read, it is pretty much twice as fast. Now, if you've been following along with the MacBook M2 launch, you know that the base model is significantly slower than this 512. And then if you jump to a 1 terabyte or 2, the performance stays the same, whereas the Dell, it will actually get even faster because this is a PCI Express 4 SSD. So as far as our storage, the MacBook gets killed. And now let's compare the M2 chip to Intel's Alder Lake 1260p. Now, yes, this is not the 1280p model. That one is not out for another month, so we would love to test it. But as far as price points and RAM and SSDs, this system's laid out the same, but the Dell costs $150 more. So this is a fair test, and the 1280p competes more with the 14-inch. Let us know which one you'd rather have us compare that 1280p to when that comes out. Now, this 12th gen chip has 12 cores, 4 of which are performance cores that reach up to 4.9 gigahertz, I believe, whereas the M2 hits 3.49 at the max. All right, we have a result, and I actually was not expecting this. We have 1548 for single core compared to 1934. So the M2 is 25% faster, and as far as multi-core, it is 10% faster than the 1260p. And yes, the Dell is set to best performance, and it is plugged in. And of course, our MacBook has been unplugged, so let's run the XPS again, unplugged, set to best performance mode. All right, we have our results, and this is unfortunate. The Dell gets 44% slower even when it's set to best performance unplugged compared to plugged in, and that makes it 60% slower than the M2 chip. Now the previous XPS, when it was unplugged, it performed the same, but the performance was always right around 5600, meaning that if you unplug it, you're getting 11th gen speeds. And now let's go ahead and compare the graphics. I plugged the Dell back in. We have Intel Iris Xe graphics on the XPS and Apple's new 10-core GPU with the M2. Now, one thing I've noticed so far is that the Dell spins up its fans all the time, even when downloading Chrome, when the Mac has stayed completely silent and so far cool running these simple tasks. And it looks like the MacBook is 67.5% faster in terms of graphics. Now this is one area where the high-end 1280p, the more expensive chip, isn't much faster than this one. And now we're gonna run GFXBench, which is optimized both for Metal and for Vulkan to test gaming performance. All right, we have 48.59 compared to its side here, but 19.0. That is 2.55 times faster. Such a massive difference. Now, some YouTube channels said you can game with the XPS. You just have to turn your graphics settings down a lot. And yes, Windows does have way more games, but this performance is not for gaming, and this is not a gaming machine. Now, we'll see how this translates to productivity in just a sec. Now, it is definitely designed for web use, so let's go ahead and run Speedometer 2.0 to see how responsive Alder Lake is. And we have 328 compared to 199 with the XPS. Now, yes, this is a lot faster, and it's faster because of that single core score and the unified memory, but 200 is still nice and snappy. Now, with that said, if you do switch over to Safari, I ran it here as well, we get 407, more than twice as fast. So I let both systems idle for about 10 minutes now, and let's go ahead and get an initial reading before we do our stress test on the CPU. Looks like the hottest point on the MacBook is 28 degrees Celsius. And then taking a look at the Dell, dang, all right, 42 right there at the top. I mean, it's a much hotter running machine. And it also looks like the graphics has to work pretty hard to run this high resolution display. Now let's go ahead and get started with our 10-minute throttling test. And pretty much right away, we're hitting 99, 100 degrees Celsius on the Dell. Our MacBook's at 70. And now the Dell slowed down just because it dropped the wattage quite a bit as the fans are spinning up. Now, in our previous videos, we showed off how this MacBook can hit even up to 108 degrees Celsius if you max out the CPU and GPU, or 104 and 5 under more easier use with just the CPU. That's because Apple tries to keep these fans off as long as possible. As you guys see here, the fan is still completely shut off. The Alder Lake chip peaked at 64 watts, whereas the M2 maxed out at 22.38. And we are still plugged in and set to best performance. Looks like our MacBook is now hitting 100 degrees Celsius at the hottest, and the fans are now kicking up. And now that it's been about 4 minutes of this test, they both settled in at right about 20 watts. Now, unfortunately, I don't have any fan speeds for the Dell, but it's running cool at about 75 degrees Celsius compared to about 100 on the Mac, with the Mac running its fans not even at half speed and staying quiet. Our test is almost finished, so let's look at the temps. We have 40 degrees for the MacBook, and then for the Dell, we're looking at about 43. So the Dell actually cooled down where its dual fans are, whereas the MacBook is starting to heat up there right at the center where the M2 chip is. All right, we are done, and we have 8,659 for the M2 chip MacBook and 6,335. That is 36% better performance for the M2 chip instead of 10% that we saw in Geekbench. Now, of course, this is a throttling test, and the XPS chose, even in best performance mode, to slow itself down to keep itself at around 75 degrees Celsius, whereas Apple doesn't care about the chip getting hot. Now, I also previously tested just a single run with the Dell, and we got 7,507. So for short bursts, the CPU difference is only about 15%. Now I was gonna test Blender, but I think at this point it doesn't make sense because the graphics performance is low. Nobody's gonna buy the XPS for that. So let's go ahead and test photo editing. I have Adobe Lightroom Classic opened with 50 42 megapixel images. And as you guys can see, the MacBook is definitely loading up these raw images with effects added quicker. Each time I switch, it has to read the file, which we know the SSD on the XPS is quick, but then it also has to apply all of those effects as well, and the Mac is much snappier. Now, one reason may be the graphics performance. I have the settings opened up right here. I have the GPU enabled for both, but with Iris graphics, it says limited graphics accelerations enabled, not full. Now, we know that the actual performance in our Geekbench test for acceleration of the graphics wasn't huge. I mean, it was noticeable, but here, maybe because of the graphics memory, and with the MacBook you have unified, so you have access to more, we have a difference. Now I'm gonna go ahead and export these 50 images, which is not an extreme test. When I did wedding photography, we would export 1500, sometimes 2000 when we would shoot weddings. Our settings are identical. Let's hit export, and our MacBook is definitely taking the lead. All right, guys, dang, this is a big difference. The XPS took 2 minutes and 54 seconds, which is not a bad time at all compared to last generation and generation before. It is faster, but our M2 took 1 minute and 7 seconds. It is extremely fast when paired with 16 gigs of RAM and a 512 gig SSD. We know that the base model, it costs $1,300, that takes 2 minutes flat. Now that base machine also slowed down to 4 minutes and 12 seconds when we had the 8 gigs of RAM full and we were in swap with 10 web browsing tasks open. So let's go ahead and open those same exact 10 web browsing tabs in Google Chrome on both machines. All right, now let's jump back into Lightroom Classic and let's see how these machines compare when we have a setup where we are using Chrome and we have different things open like we typically do, and how the responsiveness is. Now, as you see, we are using close to 5 gigs of swap on the MacBook, even though it's a 16 gig model. And the Windows laptop, it just shows how much is committed. I don't have an easy way to see swap. All right, our MacBook is done. It took 1 minute and 14 seconds, exact time that we got last time we did this test, so just 7 seconds longer than with only Lightroom open. And the XPS took 3 minutes and 4 seconds, so about 10 seconds longer. Just showing that we don't really get much slowdowns with real world use, whereas with the base MacBook and that slow SSD they put in it, it gets a ton slower. So if you're getting one of these MacBooks, make sure to at least upgrade your RAM or both. Now I'm gonna run this one more time because I wanna test out that responsiveness. We talked about in the past that unified memory works way better than regular, and some other YouTubers are refuting us saying we're wrong. So let's just check out how these systems are when you're, having something like rendering in the background, but you still wanna do some web browsing. Let's go ahead and switch to our YouTube video here. Okay, pretty good. Let's check out our video game. The Dell did have to reload that from swap. The Mac maybe had to as well, but it was much snappier. Let's check out this tab here. Once again, here we're still running a background video on IGN. Here it looks like either it's paused or it's switching through. Let's go to electric. Yep, the Mac is super snappy with 16 gigs of RAM. Let's jump to our Google Drive. Let's see if the whole thing is still loaded up here. It looks like it is. And while we're still running the export, let's do speedometer one more time, which is gonna show us loading up new websites, Google Docs, Microsoft Teams, Office Online, all those kind of things. Oh man, this is why people buy MacBooks. We have a lower number, 273 than before, using Chrome still with that render in the background, but on the Dell, we have 52.3. So the multitasking performance went down by 75%. Literally, it's a quarter of what it used to be. That is really crazy. So that just shows off, even with 16 gigs on the Windows laptop and the ultra fast SSD, just the multitasking performance and the performance of unified memory and this whole Apple Silicon architecture and how well it works together. Now, if it was Safari, it would be even better. Now I'm gonna go ahead and close all of these tabs. I'm gonna close Lightroom. And now I have DaVinci Resolve 18 open. This is the studio version on both. I have a simple 4K H.265 project. So let's go ahead and see how it plays back. Both of them are playing smooth. Both have media engines. There's an updated one for Alder Lake. So it's doing a great job. We have about 50% of a GPU being used. So we have extra room for more effects. So far I have 2 LUTs and film grain applied here. It looks like the XPS is doing pretty well. It's only using a little bit more GPU power. And as far as CPU, we're getting about 22% usage compared to about 11. So twice the CPU needed to handle this footage. And now let's go ahead and export this 5-minute project. Our MacBook is absolutely flying, not being limited by the CPU or the GPU. Here you guys see the usage. It's only limited by the encoders themselves, whereas with the XPS, we are limited not by the CPU, but by the graphics performance. And because of that, we're rendering at about 15.5 frames per second compared to 85.5 frames per second on the M2 MacBook. Our XPS is finally finished and it took 7 minutes and 39 seconds for this 5-minute project, which is not too bad. It is faster than before, but the M2 took 1 minute and 26 seconds. That is absolutely incredible. And it wasn't limited by the graphics or the CPU. Now in Final Cut, this took 2 minutes and 20 seconds, meaning the Apple has not yet updated Final Cut to make use of their own hardware, which I just find insane, where DaVinci Resolve, they are on their game. 1 minute and 26. Now in Premiere Pro, both would be slower. The Dell would be quite a bit slower as well, but this is a fair test. DaVinci Resolve is optimized for both, and wow, almost 5 times faster there, or maybe even more than 5 times faster for the M2. Now, when people comment and say, well, this M2 MacBook Pro, it's not really for pro users, it's more for people that use web applications or some simple stuff, it's just a marketing term. Well, this just shows you the MacBook is cheaper by about 150 bucks. And for real world usage, both multitasking, photo editing, video editing, unplugged performance, it is just incredible. And with that, same thing goes for battery life. Now, right now, we are at 50% battery. I cannot believe it. We have been shooting this video for, I don't know, 3.5 hours or so, running all of these performance benchmarks, pushing the machine to its limits, maxing out the screen brightness, and we're still at 50%. Whereas the Dell, it is at 77% now, but most of the time it was plugged in. It started out pretty much with a full battery. It drained down to 50 something before we even got into the performance test. And more than half of this video it's been plugged in and it's at 77. So as far as the battery life, the difference is huge. So with this kind of a tough mixed workload, the MacBook won't slow down and it will last you about 7-8 hours, which is amazing. Whereas the Dell, well, it will slow down and then it will last you probably about 3 hours or so. Now, Dave Lee showed off with light usage, which is how most companies rate it, just playing back a video. He gave this thing 9 hours and 40 minutes. And the M2 MacBook Pro, he gave 13 hours and 22 minutes. Now, of course, that's probably with the Dell in balance mode, so it's even slower. And then with real world mixed use, the difference is pretty dramatic. So just like Dave said, Apple can get away with having an old machine because the user experience is so good, multitasking, performance not slowing down. With productivity, it does great, especially if you get 16 gigs with 512 SSD, and it's cheaper as well. Now, of course, I do really like how the Dell looks really modern. I love the screen. It's a great machine. And if you're going to do basic web tasks, email, some Google Docs, things like that. It is gonna do a great job. And then you might wanna go for the 1080p display. Not gonna be as nice. You're gonna miss out on the brightness and the beautiful colors, but the battery life will get a lot better. But overall, I mean, the Mac still is a better machine if you're gonna use it as a laptop in this price range. If you do some creative tasks, things like that. And then if you don't, well, that is where the M2 MacBook Air will come in here in just about a month. So thank you guys for watching. Click that circle above to subscribe if you guys want to see more videos like this one. And if you appreciate it, check out one of those great videos right over there. This has been Max, and I'll see you in the next video.